Snow fell silently across Chicago the night Evelyn Carter stopped believing her life still mattered. It was the kind of snow that didn't announce itself, no wind, no warning. Just a slow accumulation of white across every rooftop and every memory the city held. By morning, the lakefront would be gone beneath it, and the loop would move in hushed, careful steps, and nobody would think to ask whether a woman sitting alone in a lakeside mansion had remembered to eat. She hadn't. 3 years ago, Evelyn Carter had run 7 miles every morning in weather like this. Not because she needed to, because she chose to. Because choosing discomfort before anyone else had finished their coffee was, in her philosophy, the single clearest demonstration of control. She had built Carter Biotech from a licensing idea and $900,000 of inherited debt into a publicly traded company valued north of $3 billion. She had done it in 9 years. She had done it wearing the same expression in every quarterly photo, not cold, exactly, but absolutely unreadable. The press called her the Iron Queen. She never corrected them. She was 33 years old and had not once believed that anything could take her legs. The accident had happened on a Tuesday in January, 2 years and 4 months ago. A bridge on the outer expressway, ice slick and black under the headlights. Marcus, her driver of 6 years, had said something she couldn't remember what when the rear of the car began to drift in a way that felt too slow to be real. The guardrail appeared in the windshield at an angle that made no physical sense. Then there was nothing. And then there was a hospital ceiling. And then a surgeon with a careful face was explaining what the phrase incomplete spinal injury meant in practice. Marcus had not survived the impact. Her fiancé, Preston, had come to the hospital every day for the first 2 weeks. Then every other day. Then twice a week. Then once. He had said all the correct things about love not being conditional, about facing this together, and she had watched his face while he said them, and understood with complete precision that he was practicing for the conversation to come. He had it 4 months after the accident, in the living room of what had been their shared apartment. He sat across from her wheelchair with his hands folded in his lap and explained that he wasn't the right person to support her through this. She had nodded. She had not cried. She had waited until he closed the door behind him, and then she had wheeled herself to the kitchen and poured a glass of water and stood at the window for 40 minutes watching the street below. She had not cried then, either. The board of directors had been more surgical. 3 of them, she knew which 3, had always known had begun circulating quiet concerns about executive continuity within weeks of the accident. By autumn, they had installed Victor Langford as acting CFO with a mandate to stabilize operations. Victor was 51, Harvard-trained, perpetually groomed, and possessed of the particular variety of ambition that presents itself as conscientious service. He had sent flowers to the hospital. He had sent flowers again at Christmas. He was very good at flowers. Evelyn had moved to the lakeside mansion, her grandmother's house, inherited, never sold in February. She told the board it was a temporary arrangement while she completed her rehabilitation. She told herself the same thing for 6 months. Then she stopped telling herself anything. The house was beautiful in the way that very old money makes things beautiful. High ceilings, long windows, a library that smelled of cedar and dust, a kitchen no one used. She had installed every accommodation, wider door frames, a lift to the upper floor, a roll-in shower, grab bars at every turn because that was the kind of practical competence she could still execute. She had scheduled physical therapy twice a week and canceled it twice a week with increasing regularity. Her assistant, a meticulous young woman named Patricia, worked remotely and managed the trickle of board communications that still bore Evelyn's name. The house had a full staff once. By winter, she had reduced it to a twice-weekly cleaning service and a night security firm. She did not want people moving through the rooms. She did not want to be witnessed. She sat now at the long window in the study, the city lights across the lake blurred behind 2 inches of falling snow. A cup of tea gone cold on the side table. She was wearing what she wore most days. A heavy cashmere pullover, loose flannel trousers, wool socks. Her wheelchair sat at the precise angle she always left it, angled 15 degrees toward the window. Footrests at the exact height that relieved pressure on her lower back. Some habits of precision survived everything. Her phone showed 17 unread messages. She had read none of them. She had fired 3 drivers in the past 4 months. The first had been relentlessly cheerful in the manner of someone who'd read an article about positivity and disability. The second had helped her into the car with a hand under her elbow that she hadn't asked for. The third had said, of course, no problem at all to every single request in a tone that communicated he was doing her a very large personal favor. She had written the termination notices herself, 3 sentences each, and felt no particular satisfaction in any of them. Patricia had forwarded a new candidate file that afternoon. Evelyn hadn't opened it. Outside, the snow went on falling. The lake was invisible. The city was a soft orange smear beyond the white. She looked at it for a long time, this view that had cost her grandmother a fortune, and that she had loved as a child, and she thought with a quiet clarity that surprised her by its absence of drama, perhaps my life ended on that bridge. Perhaps everything, since, has simply been the administration of the aftermath. She reached for the cold tea, thought better of it, and turned the chair away from the window. She opened the candidate file. Daniel Brooks had been awake since 5. Not because Lily needed him, she was still asleep, one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress, her hair a catastrophe across the pillow, her breathing deep and even and somehow the most reassuring sound he had ever learned. He was awake because the radiator in the second bedroom had started making a sound like someone tapping a wrench against a pipe. And because the building supervisor had not returned his call, and because at some point in the night he had run the numbers again and arrived at the same answer. 40. 2 days until he was behind on rent, assuming nothing else broke. He lived on the south side, in a 3-room apartment, above a dry cleaner that kept the stairwell warm in winter. It was a functional apartment, clean. The windows faced east, and the morning light was good. Lily had drawn constellations on a strip of glow-in-the-dark paper and stuck them to the ceiling above her bed. Orion, Cassiopeia, the Pleiades, and one arrangement she had invented herself and named after the Arctic fox in her favorite picture book. He had not told her it wasn't a real constellation. It seemed unkind. He made coffee and stood at the kitchen window. The street below was empty at this hour. The sidewalk unmarked by foot traffic. The snow, a clean, unbroken sheet beneath the streetlight. He had driven long-haul freight for 6 years before Claire got sick. After she died, he had kept driving for a year and a half because it was the only thing he knew how to do, and because his brother-in-law in Naperville had been willing to take Lily during the long runs. Then his brother-in-law had moved to Phoenix for work. And Daniel had come home for good. And the freight company had nothing for a local driver at his seniority, and he had been reassembling an income from smaller pieces ever since. Airport pickups, corporate shuttles, the occasional private client. Claire had been 29 when the cardiomyopathy was diagnosed. She had spent the last 8 months of her life making Lily small gifts drawings, a hand-sewn stuffed penguin, a box of letters labeled with ages. Open when you're 10. Open when you're 13. Open on your first day of school. Daniel kept the box on the high shelf in Lily's room. He had taken it down once to count the letters. There were 22. He was not a broken man. He was clear about this distinction. He was a tired man with a precise understanding of what he had lost. And he got up every morning and made coffee and made breakfast and walked Lily to school and did the work available to him. He did not consider this heroic. He considered it minimum. He had found the job listing on a Thursday, in the back section of a private employment board a dispatcher friend had given him access to. Private household driver, full-time, Chicago North Shore. Accommodation, required for employer with mobility disability. Clean record, discretion essential, compensation negotiable. The compensation listed was not negotiable in the way that number was actually very large. He had stared at it for a moment, then read the posting again, then applied before he could construct a reason not to. The interview was held on a Friday at a downtown law firm, which struck him as an odd location for hiring a driver. There were 6 other men in the waiting area. They were, to varying degrees, polished pressed trousers, structured jackets, the particular ease of men who had done well in front of strangers before. Daniel wore the gray Oxford shirt he kept clean for things that mattered. He had shined his shoes the night before. He sat in the chair nearest the window and did not try to make conversation. The woman who conducted the first round was a lawyer named Patricia Shen, who asked clear, specific questions and listened to the answers without expression. She asked about his driving record, his familiarity with Chicago in winter, his experience with clients who had physical disabilities. his discretion. He answered each question once, directly. When she asked what he thought was the most important quality in a driver of this kind, he said, "Knowing when not to speak." She wrote something on her notepad. He was called back 15 minutes later. The other men were still sitting. The room they let him into was long and corporate, overlooking Michigan Avenue. A woman sat at the far end in a wheelchair, and the stillness with which she occupied it told Daniel immediately that she had been occupying it for long enough that it was no longer something she was aware of. She looked at each of them in sequence, not rudely, but with the focused attention of someone accustomed to making rapid assessments, and then her eyes moved to Daniel, and she held them there for 4 seconds, and then she said to Patricia, "That one." He was hired before she asked him a single question. He arrived 2 minutes early every morning. Not 5. Not 10. 2. He had calculated, without thinking about it explicitly, that arriving too early communicated anxiety, which was a burden on the employer. 2 minutes meant reliability without neediness. It meant the car was warm, and the route had been considered, and there would be no uncertainty waiting at the door. Evelyn noticed on the second day. The first week was quiet, in a way that had texture to it, not the silence of two strangers avoiding each other, but the silence of two people who had independently decided that silence was the appropriate starting point. He opened the car door, confirmed the destination, drove. He did not make eye contact through the rearview mirror, except when it was functionally necessary. He did not ask how she was feeling. He did not offer opinions on the traffic or the weather unless she asked, and she never asked. The routes were mostly practical. The law firm downtown, the rehabilitation facility on North Michigan, twice to a medical research building in Evanston where she sat in the car for 90 minutes without going inside. He drove and did not comment on the Evanston trips. On the third one, as they pulled back onto the expressway, she said from the back seat, "I used to have a laboratory there." He said, "Ah." She didn't continue. He didn't press. They drove back through the gray afternoon in the same quiet they'd left in, and he thought it was perhaps the most honest conversation he'd had with an employer. The cold was extraordinary, that January, the kind that made the river steam and turned every breath visible and settled into the city like a judgment. He kept the car at a precise temperature. Learned within the first 3 days that she preferred slightly warmer than the default setting, and adjusted without mentioning it. He planned routes that avoided the outer expressway. A decision he made without examining his reasons too carefully, only noting that it added 4 minutes, and she had not asked about the time. On a Wednesday in the second week, the front wheel of her chair caught in a gap where the sidewalk had heaved and cracked under the frost. She was 3 feet from the car. Her momentum stopped, the chair listing slightly at an angle that required effort to hold. She did not ask for help. He watched this for approximately 2 seconds, long enough to assess, not long enough to embarrass, and then came around, crouched beside the wheel, found the edge of ice that had caught the caster, and cleared it with the flat of his key. He straightened and stepped back without touching her or the chair. "The city hasn't resurfaced this block in 4 years, he said. "I've been watching the 311 requests go unanswered on the municipal portal. I'll find a different pull-up spot tomorrow." She looked at him. It was the first time she had looked at him the way she'd looked at those other 6 men in the interview room, actually assessing, not just registering his presence. "You looked up the 311 portal for this block? There's a lot of time between pickups." She let a moment pass. Then, "The other entrance on Wabash has a concrete pad that was resurfaced last spring. I'll use that one." "Good." That evening, driving back along the lakeshore, he said, not to fill silence, but because it was true. "The ice there this morning was at the joint between the original pour and a patch. That's a design failure, not a maintenance failure. Whoever patched it didn't account for differential expansion. It'll keep breaking until they redo the whole section." From the back seat, after a pause, "That's a systems analysis. My wife used to say I over-explained things." A silence, different from the other silences. "She sounds perceptive," Evelyn said. She was. He kept his eyes on the road. She was very perceptive. He felt her make the calculation present tense, used in past tense, and understood that she'd filed it correctly, and was grateful she didn't ask a follow-up question. 3 days later, on a bitterly cold morning when the thermometer read 11 degrees, he found her in the entry hall already in her coat. The curtains of the front window opened for the first time since he'd started. The winter light, flat, blue-white, coming off the snow-covered lawn fell across her face, and she was looking at it, not at anything specific, just looking. He stood in the doorway without speaking. She became aware of him after a moment. "I'd forgotten what it looks like," she said, which was not an explanation. "It's particularly clear today," he said. "The cold does that. Burns off the particulates." She turned the chair away from the window. He held the door. They went out into the cold. The babysitter called at 7:43 on a Thursday morning with a voice full of apology. Her own daughter had a fever. She couldn't come. Daniel stood in the kitchen, weighing options for exactly 90 seconds, then called Patricia, explained the situation in one sentence, and asked if he could bring Lily to work. Patricia said she would check. She called back in 4 minutes. "Miss Carter says it's fine." He wasn't sure what he had expected Evelyn's reaction to be, but fine had not been near the top of the list. Lily was 7 years old and took the world at face value in the particular way of children who had experienced enough loss to understand that it was real, but not enough to have learned to flinch from it. She was interested in Arctic animals, in stars, and in the specific engineering question of how bridges stayed up, which had become a preoccupation after a school unit on structural design. She had strong opinions about penguins that they were, definitively, the most interesting bird, and had expressed these opinions at length to her pediatrician, her teacher, and a stranger at the grocery store, who had made the error of engaging her in conversation. She sat in the front seat with her backpack in her lap and looked at Chicago going past the windows with an expression of complete attention. "Who lives in the house we're going to?" she asked. "A woman named Miss Carter. She's my employer." "What's she like?" "Quiet. Thoughtful." He paused. "She's had a hard couple of years." Lily considered this. "Like us? Differently, I think. But yes. A little bit like us." Evelyn was waiting in the entrance hall. She registered Lily's presence with a look that was not warm exactly, but not closed either, the face of someone encountering something unexpected and choosing to assess it rather than reject it. Lily looked at the wheelchair for approximately 1 second with the frank curiosity of 7-year-olds, then looked at Evelyn's face. "Hi," Lily said. "I'm Lily. Dad says I can sit quietly in the back. But I want you to know that quietly is a relative term." Something shifted in Evelyn's expression. Not a smile. The precursor to a smile. The muscular preparation for one. "I appreciate the disclosure," Evelyn said. Lily sat in the back beside Evelyn's usual spot while Daniel drove. She sat quietly for 3 minutes, which was, as advertised, the extent of her range. Then she asked Evelyn what the buildings on the left were, and Evelyn said they were financial services firms. And Lily asked what financial services meant, and Evelyn gave a 1-sentence explanation, and Lily said, "So they hold money for people?" And Evelyn said, "Essentially." And Lily said, "I keep my money in a jar with a drawing of a polar bear on it." And Evelyn said, "That's a reasonable system." Daniel watched this in the rearview mirror. They had 3 stops that morning. At the second stop, the law firm on LaSalle. Lily waited in the car with him. She drew in her sketchbook for 10 minutes. Then looked up. "She's sad," Lily said. He glanced in the mirror at the empty back seat, then at his daughter. "What makes you say that?" Her eyes. When she was looking at the buildings, like she was remembering them instead of seeing them. He drove in silence for a moment. "You're probably right. Did something happen to her?" "Yes. To her legs. To her legs, and to some other things." Lily thought about this, with the visible effort she gave to problems she took seriously. "Dad, do you still remember what it felt like to run? Like, when we used to race in the park?" "Of course. Do you think she remembers?" He didn't answer. Lily sat with the question for a while, apparently satisfied to hold it rather than resolve it. When Evelyn returned from the last stop and settled into the back seat, Lily turned to her without preamble. "Do you still remember what it feels like to run?" she asked. "Like, the wind part?" The car became very still. Daniel kept his hands exactly where they were on the wheel, and his eyes on the road ahead, and said nothing. A long pause from the back seat. "Yes," Evelyn said finally. Her voice was level. "I remember it very well. I think about that sometimes," Lily said. Like if something happened and I couldn't do something anymore. Whether I'd remember what it felt like. She turned to look out the window at the street, going past. But then I think even if you can't do the thing anymore, you can still go places and see things. Like, the seeing part still works. The noticing part. Another silence. Much longer. The noticing part still works, Evelyn repeated, very quietly, as though memorizing it. Yeah. Lily held up her sketchbook. I drew a snow leopard. Do you want to see? That evening, Daniel picked Lily up from his neighbor's apartment, where she'd spent the afternoon, made dinner, read 2 chapters of a book about Antarctic expeditions, and turned off her light. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee going cold and thought about the expression he'd seen in the rearview mirror when Lily said the noticing part still works not on Evelyn's face, which was behind him, but in the quality of the silence that came from the back seat, the particular weight of it. He had spent 2 years learning the difference between silence that meant nothing and silence that meant something had shifted. The physical therapy sessions resumed in February. She didn't tell him she'd rescheduled them. She simply gave him the address on a Monday morning, a rehabilitation facility in Lincoln Park he hadn't driven to before, and said 10 o'clock without further explanation. He drove her there, parked, and waited with the engine off and a book he was making slow progress through. She came out 90 minutes later, looking wrung out in a way that was different from her usual exhaustion, not the gray fatigue of someone performing wellness, but the specific, localized depletion of work done. Good session? He asked. Difficult, she said. Good. She looked at him sharply. Difficult usually means something's happening, he said. Easy sessions are the ones that don't do much. She looked at him for a moment. You sound like a physical therapist. I drove one for 3 months last year. She was very informative. The corner of her mouth moved. I imagine she was. He stopped, on the way back, at a place on Armitage that made hot chocolate with actual melted chocolate and a very small amount of cream. He had discovered it during a long wait in November and had thought, without a clear reason, that it was the kind of thing she might appreciate more than she would acknowledge. He set the cup in the holder beside her without comment. She looked at it. She drank half of it before they reached the lake. He did not mention it. Neither did she, but the following Monday she said, unprompted. The place on Armitage doesn't open until 9:30. I know, he said. We'll have time if we leave at 9. The sessions built on themselves. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sometimes Saturdays. He learned her rhythms by attention rather than inquiry. The days when silence was genuine rest, and the days when it was a form of bracing. The difference between the quiet of someone who was thinking and the quiet of someone who was enduring. He adjusted accordingly. And she did not thank him for it. Which told him she recognized it and preferred that they both pretend it was simply competence. He found a route along the northern lakefront that was entirely flat and had been recently resurfaced with a smooth aggregate. On a Thursday in late February, on a whim he did not examine closely, he asked if she wanted to stop. It was 11 degrees and the sky was the deep, cold blue that only comes in midwinter. She looked at the lake for a moment. For how long? As long as you want. They sat on a bench, she beside it, in the chair. Him on the bench itself, and watched the lake in silence for 20 minutes. The ice shelf extended 40 feet from shore, ridged and blue, shadowed. Beyond it, the water was very dark and very still. A single crow walked along the ice shelf, testing it with each step. I used to come here, she said, running. This stretch. I guessed. You guessed? Your first month, you asked me twice to take different routes that went along the water. But you never asked to stop. She was quiet for a moment. I wasn't ready to stop. I know. And now you thought I was? I thought it might be worth finding out. She looked at the lake a while longer. Then, my grandmother used to say that you can spend so much time trying to get back to who you were that you miss finding out who you're becoming. He said nothing to that. It didn't need a response. At some point in March, Lily began drawing pictures and leaving them in his jacket pocket for him to find, which he would then leave on the passenger seat, which Evelyn could see from the back. He discovered this protocol when he found a drawing wedged under his jacket one morning and placed it on the seat without thinking. And Evelyn, after a long silence, said, "Is that a queen on a throne?" "I believe that's supposed to be a wheelchair," he said. Lily is optimistic about her artistic range. Beneath the drawing, in careful 7-year-old letters, "The pretty wheelchair queen." Evelyn held the drawing for the rest of the drive. He didn't see what happened to it after, but the following week there was a small package in the back seat, a picture book about snow leopards, with a note in the same precise handwriting he'd seen on board communications. For Lily, who sees things correctly. E.C., he told Lily that evening. She read the book twice before bed and asked him to make sure Miss Carter knew that snow leopards were almost as good as polar bears, which is really saying something. He relayed this message the following morning. Evelyn looked out the window, and the corner of her mouth moved again. Further this time. And he looked back at the road before he could see the rest of it. March turned into April, which in Chicago meant the snow retreated by degrees rather than all at once, leaving behind gray slush and then brown grass, and then, gradually, tentatively, a color that wasn't quite green. He had been her driver for 4 months. He had begun, without tracking it consciously, to know her schedule better than Patricia did. He knew that the Wednesday therapy sessions were harder than the Friday ones, and that she needed 20 minutes afterward before conversation was possible. He knew she ate almost nothing in the morning and compensated poorly in the afternoon. He knew she had not spoken to her former fiancé since the previous year, and that she did not speak of her father, and that she had a sister in Portland whom she called once a month with the efficiency of someone fulfilling an obligation she took seriously. He also knew from overhearing a phone call he hadn't tried to hear that Victor Langford was scheduling a board meeting in May, and that the agenda item described as long-term executive structure review meant something specific and not good. On an April evening, sitting in the car outside the law firm while she finished a meeting that had run long, he said when she finally got in the back seat, looking careful in the way she did when she was tired. "You don't have to answer this, but how long has Langford been positioning himself?" She looked at him in the mirror. He held the look. "You heard something," she said. "I try not to listen. I don't always succeed." A pause, longer than I gave him credit for. He started the car. They drove for a while without speaking. Then she said, "Your wife. How did she die?" He had expected the question eventually. He had prepared for it in the abstract way. You prepare for something you know is coming. Cardiomyopathy. She was 31. He kept his voice even. It was very fast, at the end. We had 8 months from diagnosis. She was quiet. Then, "That's not very long, no. But we did well with it, I think." He checked his mirror, changed lanes. She spent a lot of it making things for Lily, so she'd have pieces of her. Evelyn didn't respond for a long time. Then, "I'm sorry. Thank you." Another silence. "Did you?" She stopped. "Did I what? How did you keep going?" "Afterward. When you didn't want to." He considered the question. It was the most direct question she had ever asked him, and it deserved a direct answer. "There were days in the first year where I got up in the morning not because I wanted to but because Lily needed breakfast," he said. "That's a small thing. But it's something to do. And if you do the small thing, sometimes you find out you can do the next small thing. And eventually, the small things add up into something that looks enough like a life that you start to want it again." She looked out the window. "I'm not sure that works without a Lily," she said. "No," he agreed. "You need something. Not necessarily a person. Just something that requires you." The something, he didn't say, was different for everyone. He had his hunch about what hers might be. He was not wrong. In late April, she asked Patricia to schedule a board call. She reviewed the company's quarterly numbers for the first time in 6 months. She asked Daniel, during a long drive back from Evanston, whether he thought the difference between a person who came back from something and a person who didn't was a matter of character or circumstance. He thought about it genuinely before he answered. "I think it's usually who's in the room with them," he said. "Not in a sentimental way. Just that the people around you set a kind of pressure. If everyone expects you to disappear, it becomes easier to disappear. If someone acts like you're still here, it's harder to act like you're not." She looked at him in the rearview mirror for a moment. Not the assessing look. Something else. "You've been doing that," she said, deliberately. "I've been doing my job. Don't be modest. It's not one of your qualities." He smiled at the road. Fair. That evening, He arrived home to find Lily had made dinner, scrambled eggs and toast, which she was extremely proud of, and while they ate, she asked him how his day was, which she always asked, and he said it was a good day, which he was not always able to say, and she said good with the satisfaction of someone who had been waiting for that answer for a while. He did not examine what that meant too closely. He was fairly sure he already knew. Victor Langford arrived at the wrong conclusion, which was that Daniel Brooks was a problem that could be solved with money. He sent an intermediary, a man in a gray overcoat who met Daniel in the parking structure of the rehabilitation facility on a Tuesday morning while Evelyn was in session. The man was polite, professionally indirect, and offered him $60,000 to resign his position and relocate with his daughter to another city. He said the money would be available within 72 hours. He said there would be no questions asked. Daniel listened to all of this. Then he said, no. The man made various adjustments to his offer. Daniel said no to each of them with the same quality of flatness, which was not anger but a complete absence of negotiability. The man eventually left. Daniel sat in the car for a while, thinking about what $60,000 would mean in practical terms, the rent cleared, the debts handled, Lily's school secured, and then thinking about what it would mean in other terms, and the calculation was not complicated. He had been bought before, in smaller ways, by employers who wanted a particular kind of quiet. He had learned to recognize it, and he had always, in the end, told the truth about what he'd seen. This seemed like a scaled-up version of the same situation. What followed was more sophisticated. Within a week, there were stories circulating in the professional networks Evelyn moved through. He heard fragments through Patricia, who was alarmed enough to be indiscreet, suggesting that her driver had taken advantage of her emotional vulnerability, that she was forming an inappropriate dependence, that her judgment was compromised. The stories were not attributed to anyone specific. They didn't need to be. He told Evelyn on a Thursday evening, in the driveway of the mansion, with the car still running. Victor sent someone to offer me money to leave, he said. I said no. Now there are stories going around. I thought you should know. She was very still. What kind of stories? He told her. Her expression didn't change in any visible way, but something tightened at the edges. Not anger, he thought. Or not only anger, but something more fundamental than that. Recognition, the look of someone understanding the shape of what had been done to them. You should go, she said quietly. I disagree. I'm not asking your opinion. I know, I'm offering it anyway. He turned in the seat to face her properly. Victor is doing this because you're getting better. He's been counting on you staying gone. You're not going to stay gone. And he needs to stop you before you get your footing back. Getting rid of me is one piece of that. She looked at him for a long moment. If you stay, she said carefully, this becomes more complicated for you. It's already complicated. My daughter made you a drawing of a snow leopard, and you wrote her a thank you note on Carter Biotech letterhead. I think we're past the point where complicated is a reason to leave. A very long pause. I'm the only person, she said, and here something in her voice changed, became very quiet and very precise, who has made me feel like I'm still here. You're the only one who never looked at me like I was already gone. She stopped. That's a terrible amount of power to have. I know, he said. I'm not sure you do. He held her gaze. I know that it's not something I've done to you. I think it's something you've done for yourself. And I've been nearby while it happened. That's different. She looked out the window at the dark water. Stay, she said finally. Please. He turned back to the wheel. I'll be here at 8. He had been thinking about it since February. Not constantly, but in the spaces between, during long waits, during highway stretches, during the quiet stretches at 5 in the morning when Lily was still asleep and the radiator was doing its thing. The accident had been on the outer expressway in January, 2 years and 5 months ago, on a stretch of road maintained by the city under a contract that had been renegotiated 18 months prior. He had looked this up without specific intention, the way he had always looked up things that interested him. Quietly, methodically, letting one fact lead to the next. Marcus, the driver who had died, had filed a maintenance request through the fleet management portal 6 weeks before the accident, flagging an intermittent response issue in the brake system of the specific vehicle. The request had been logged and assigned. It had never been actioned. The vehicle had continued to be assigned to Evelyn's calendar. He found this in the fleet management records that Evelyn had. In a moment of trust, he suspected she did not fully examine, given him access to when he'd asked about the vehicle's service history for route planning purposes. He hadn't lied exactly. He had been less than complete. He brought what he'd found to Patricia first, because Patricia was careful, and because she had access to things he didn't. Patricia spent 4 days being careful, and what she found made her very quiet when she called him. The maintenance request had been closed without action by someone in fleet operations. That person had been hired 8 months before the accident. On a recommendation from Victor Langford's personal office, the vehicle had been taken out of rotation 2 days after the accident, serviced, and returned to the fleet. The service records for that specific servicing did not appear in the standard documentation trail. There was also the question of the route. Evelyn's standard route home that January night had been through the tunnel, which was heated and ice-free. The tunnel had been rerouted due to a water main repair, a repair that had been moved up 3 days on the schedule, according to city records. Due to a permit request filed by a construction contractor. That contractor had done 18 months of work for a commercial real estate subsidiary of a holding company, in which Victor Langford held a minority stake. None of this was proof. All of it was a pattern. He drove Evelyn to a meeting with a white-collar criminal attorney named Robert Fairfield on a Tuesday morning in April. He had asked Patricia to arrange it. He had told Evelyn only that he had found something she needed to hear from a lawyer. She listened to Fairfield for an hour. Then she asked 3 questions, each more specific than the last. Then she sat for a long time without speaking, looking at the surface of the conference table. Marcus had a daughter, she said finally. She's 12 now. Yes, Fairfield said. She's been told it was a weather-related accident. As far as I know. Evelyn put her hands flat on the table. Daniel watched her from across the room and did not look away. What do you need from me? She said. She did not break. He had wondered if she might. And then he thought no. Not this one. Not after everything she'd already absorbed. What she felt was something different from breaking. It was the reorganization of grief into purpose. The moment when the weight of something becomes the reason to carry it, rather than the reason to fall. He drove her home in silence. It was the longest silence they'd shared. And it was full of things neither of them had words for yet. When they pulled up to the mansion, she said, without turning, "Thank you for finding it. I should have found it sooner." "No. You found it when I was ready to do something with it." He thought about that for a long time after she went inside. The board meeting was scheduled for the second Tuesday in May, which arrived with a late cold snap that dusted the city in a thin, unexpected snow. The kind that looked like winter reasserting itself briefly before admitting defeat. Victor had constructed it carefully. The agenda moved through routine items toward the final quarter, where a resolution titled Executive Restructuring and Succession Planning would be introduced with the support of 3 allied board members, each of whom had been cultivated over 2 years. It was designed to be presented as a matter of prudent governance rather than a coup. And in ordinary circumstances, it might have functioned exactly as designed. These were not ordinary circumstances. Evelyn had spent 3 weeks preparing with Fairfield and a second attorney named James Okafor, who specialized in securities and corporate governance. She had also spent 3 weeks in physical therapy that her therapist described, with restrained professional awe, as the most focused consecutive work I've seen in my career. She was not walking, but she had regained substantial core strength, and she moved through the world with a quality of presence that had not been visible in the winter. Daniel drove her downtown at 7:45. She wore the charcoal suit she had worn to the last quarterly meeting before the accident, fitted, high-collared, the lapels precise. She had her hair up in a way that was different from her casual style. Something deliberate about it. She sat in the back seat, with a leather portfolio across her lap, and looked out the window at the city. "How are you?" he asked. "Prepared," she said. "Good. Are you going to tell me to be careful?" "No, you don't need that. I was going to say that Marcus's daughter is named Harper. She lives in Pilsen with her grandmother. I thought you'd want to know her name." A silence. "Harper, yes." She put a hand briefly against the window glass. Then she straightened in her seat and looked at the road ahead. He pulled up to the building on Michigan Avenue. He came around and opened the door. She moved to the chair with the practiced efficiency she had rebuilt over months of effort, and she paused in front of the entrance, not hesitating, just marking the moment, and then she went through the doors. He parked and waited. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 19 minutes. He had estimated 2 hours. She came out through the lobby doors, moving at a pace she reserved for situations that had been decided in her favor. He brought the car around before she reached the curb. "Done?" he asked. "Victor is being escorted from the premises," she said. "The FBI would like him available for a conversation tomorrow." He drove in silence for a moment. "Harper's grandmother is named Patricia too." "Different Patricia." Evelyn looked at him. "You looked her up." "I had time." Another moment. "Then, I'm going to establish a trust. For Harper. I want her grandmother to have the address of a good estate attorney. I'll find one." She looked out the window at the city, her company, her life going past at 30 miles per hour in the pale spring light. "It was a long winter," she said. "It was," he agreed. "I don't mean just the weather." "I know." She put her head back against the seat. He watched the road. The snow from the morning had already begun to melt. May arrived properly in the 3rd week, and with it the particular Chicago spring that residents treat as a gift after endurance. Warm light off the lake, the flowering trees along the lakefront boulevards, the city moving differently, less braced, more open. Looking up, Evelyn's physical therapy moved to 3 times a week in May. And on a Thursday afternoon she actually stood, both hands on parallel bars, her therapist's hands ready at her sides but not touching for 11 seconds. She counted them. She reported this to no one, but when Daniel picked her up, she was quieter than usual, and it was the quiet of someone holding something carefully rather than the quiet of someone containing something difficult, and he recognized the difference. He picked up Lily from school on Fridays when the timing worked out. And on a Friday in late May, Lily asked to stop at the lake on the way. He parked along the lakefront drive and Lily went ahead toward the water, moving with the particular purposeful inefficiency of children who are going somewhere interesting. He walked behind her, watching the path. Evelyn's chair moved alongside him. "She wants to see if the ice shelf is gone," he said. "It is. Has been since March." "I know. She knows. She wants to see the water where it was." Evelyn was quiet. Then, "She grieves things when they're done, not when they're happening. That's unusual for a child. She learned it from her mother. Claire was like that. She sounds exceptional." She was. He watched Lily reach the low wall at the water's edge and put both hands on it and lean to look at the lake. "She would have liked you. She had no patience for people who coasted. She would have respected your board meeting very much." Evelyn looked at Lily at the wall. "I might have liked her too. I think so." They stayed there for a while, Lily at the wall, the two of them back on the path, the city behind them and the lake ahead. The light was the long, golden kind of late afternoon, and the water was alive with it. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes. What do you want from here? Not the company. You. What do you want the next year to look like?" She took her time with this. He had learned that her silences were usually productive rather than avoidant. And he waited. "I want to walk," she said. "On the parallel bars, without hands, for at least 10 seconds. My therapist thinks it may be possible." A pause. "I want to meet Harper. Not to fix anything, just to be accountable." Another pause. "I want to stop treating my grandmother's house like it's a place I'm waiting to leave." That's a good list. It's a short list. Short lists are better. Easier to actually do. She looked at him then, not sideways, not in a mirror, directly, and he met it. "You're on the list," she said. "I wasn't sure how to put it, so I left it off. But you should know." He held the look. "Okay, that's all you're going to say?" "I'm going to say, this also hasn't been only professional, for a while now. I wasn't going to be the first one to say it, because you were being careful. Because it wasn't my call to make first." She looked at the lake. "Do you always wait for the other person to be ready?" "I try to. It's not always easy." "No," she said. "I imagine not." She looked back at him. "I'm ready." He nodded once. "Then we're in agreement." Lily came back along the path at a run, which she converted at the last second into a careful walk, clearly remembering some rule about running near water. She stopped in front of Evelyn. "The ice is definitely gone," she said. "The water looks different without it. Bigger. It is bigger," Evelyn said. "The ice shelf reduces the visible surface area by roughly 30% in a hard winter." Lily considered this. "That's a lot of lake to get back." "It is. Does it feel good, getting the lake back?" Evelyn looked at the water, and then at the city behind them, and then at Lily's face. "Yes," she said. "It feels very good." Lily reached out and took Evelyn's hand with the frank physical confidence of a child who has decided someone is safe. She held it while they stood there. Evelyn looked at their hands for a moment. And then she didn't look away from the water. And her expression was the face of someone feeling something they had not allowed themselves to feel for a long time. The plain, human fact of being held. He watched this from a step back and did not move. The late May sun fell across the lakefront in long, level bars of gold. The traffic behind them on the drive was a quiet, distant hum. The water was very blue and very large, and completely free of ice. And the season that had been going for what felt like much too long had finally, genuinely, turned. Lily said, "Can we come back here next week?" He said, "Yes." Evelyn said, "I'd like that." Lily released her hand and moved ahead on the path, already thinking about something else, already 3 things forward in the way of children who haven't learned yet to hoard the good moments, who assume there will be more. He fell into step beside Evelyn's chair, and they walked back along the path toward the car. And she said quietly, "Not as conclusion, but as fact, I don't know what I would have done without you. I mean that seriously. I know, you're not going to be modest about it. You said it wasn't one of my qualities. I did." She was quiet for a moment. "You didn't heal my legs." "No. But you made me believe my life was still worth saving." I don't have a word for what that is. Exactly. You don't need one." She nodded. They walked a while more in the good light. 8 o'clock tomorrow?" she said. "I'll be there at 7:58, he said. 2 minutes early, always." The path curved back toward the parking area, and Lily was already at the car, standing on the wheel well to be taller, shading her eyes against the sun to watch a sailboat making its way north. Behind it, the lake stretched out flat and clear and enormous, the way it always did when you finally stopped being afraid to look at it directly.